Joining us live is the Labor MP Julian Hill and Liberal MP Keith Wolahan. Gentlemen, good morning to you both. So, Julian, to you first. Jason Clare and the PM, as you saw there, as you know already, they're at odds over that River to the Sea slogan and what it means. We've spoken about this conflict more than once, so what do you think that slogan means?
I've had an entirely consistent position, I will say, publicly and privately for a very long time on this issue. Any side of this long-standing conflict, this decades-old conflict that wants 100% of the land is in effect arguing for permanent violence and ongoing conflict. That's true for those pro-Palestinian protesters who think that they want 100% of the land. It's also true for extremist right-wing Israelis who also want to colonise the West Bank and dispossess the rest of the Palestinian population. Australia's position and Labor's position, it's been a bipartisan position for decades in Australia, is in support of a two-state solution. So by definition, the Prime Minister's right that if you want 100% of the land, you're arguing against a two-state solution and against a peaceful resolution to the conflict.
But on that statement, though, from the river to the sea, do you acknowledge that that calls for the destruction of Israel?
Look, I get why you're trying to set up a binary, I do. And I've just stated my position very, very clearly that I do not support either side of this debate that are calling for 100% of the land. That is a recipe for permanent conflict.
Yeah.
So I absolutely understand that people can mean that in different ways. So do you think that's what Jason Clare was getting at? The Prime Minister's right to call out absolutists who want 100% of an outcome. That's not a resolution to this long-standing conflict.
Keith, what do you think?
Well, I think the English language has a plain meaning most of the time, and this certainly does. It means from the Jordan River on the east to the Mediterranean Sea on the west, and in between is Israel. And so Julian is right. It is a binary solution, which is no solution at all. It is a recipe for further violence. And I've actually asked people who have held up a sign like that, what do you mean? And they mean exactly that. So there's no ambiguity. I think the disappointing part here isn't with the Prime Minister, and Julian answered, I understand. It's with the Education Minister, Jason Clare, who had a on the one hand and on the other hand answer. The Education Minister, more than anyone else, should be very clear in his language for something that is happening in an area of his responsibility. And he's been left wanting, and the Prime Minister called him out on it.
Yeah, OK. Let's go into money matters. You saw the statements from Michelle Bullock yesterday. Julian, I go to you. Can you guarantee this budget will not rev up inflation and fire it up?
We're sort of in that twilight zone, aren't we, in the week before a budget where the media rightly probe members of Parliament about what's going to be in the budget, and members of Parliament...
I know you've got the exclusive details,
particularly
Julian.
those outside the Cabinet. Yeah, that's right, particularly those outside the Cabinet. I say, I'm not going to tell you, and I can't tell you what's in the budget, but I'll just make a couple of points. The Reserve Bank kept interest rates on hold, and that's around 8 months since there was at last any changes to interest rates. No one wants to see interest rates rise further, and of course we want to see inflation moderate, return to that target range so interest rate cuts can then occur. Next week's budget, though, as the Treasurer has said, will be focused on responsible cost of living relief, that first short-term goal of working with monetary policy and the Reserve Bank to get inflation down. It's around halved since we came to office, inherited that inflation crisis. So things like you saw in the last budget, cheaper childcare, cheaper medicines, rent assistance relief that put downwards pressure on inflation. Yep. They were the things we did last time. This time we'll see the tax cuts, Labor's cost of living tax cuts flow, and other measures the Treasurer has flagged that will be announced next week. But all of that needs to work with the Reserve Bank to put downwards pressure on inflation and interest rates.
Yeah, I've got concerns over the tax cuts and how inflationary they might be. Keith, what are your thoughts on this? We'll have to close here.
Well, what we know is that bringing this inflation number down is like a 5-kilometre race, and we're in the last kilometre, and that is the hardest bit, kilometre of all. And the Reserve Bank has done all that it can, and I think it has sent a warning to this government in the budget: do not increase the pressure that will ultimately lead to the Reserve Bank potentially having to increase rates. And families just can't afford that. Those on a $750,000 mortgage are paying $24,000 more than they did before. They just don't have any capacity to pay more.
Yeah. Keith, Julian, good to chat as always. Good to see you both. We'll see you next week.